He only meant to check a strange sound in the brush. But minutes later, he was holding an injured lion cub, while a full pride of adult lions slowly surrounded him. No roars, no growls, just eyes, sharp, ancient, and unblinking. What happened next defied every rule of the wild. This isn't a legend. It's a real moment, captured on camera, that left millions speechless. And it all began with one decision: to save a life, no matter the cost. The morning in Kagalagatti began the way it always did: quiet, vast, and deceptively peaceful. The kind of silence that felt heavy rather than empty, stretching across the red earth and low grasslands as the sun climbed higher. Michael Carter had learned long ago that this kind of stillness was never meaningless. In the wild, silence often meant something was watching, or something was wrong. At 41, Michael had spent more than half his life in places like this. He was a former park ranger, now working as a senior wilderness guide for a private ecotourism company that catered mostly to retired travelers from the United States. People who had spent decades behind desks, in insurance offices, law firms, or financial planning agencies, and now wanted to see something real before time caught up with them. Michael understood them. He guided them carefully, responsibly, always emphasizing safety, conservation, and respect for nature. That morning, he had parked the vehicle near a dry riverbed while his small group photographed distant antelope. The rains from the night before had passed quickly, leaving behind damp soil and the faint smell of wet stone. Michael stood a short distance away, scanning the terrain out of habit, when he heard it. At first, it barely registered. Just a sound out of place. A thin, broken cry that didn't belong to the wind or the birds. It came again, weaker this time, drifting from a patch of thorny brush near the riverbank. Michael's body stiffened. Years of experience sharpened his instincts faster than conscious thought ever could. He walked slowly toward the sound, careful not to alarm the group behind him. Each step felt heavier than the last. The closer he got, the clearer the noise became. It wasn't the call of an adult predator. It was smaller, higher, desperate. When he parted the brush, the sight stopped him cold. A lion cub, no more than a few months old, was wedged between two slabs of rock near the edge of the riverbed. One of its hind legs was trapped deep in a narrow crevice, twisted at an unnatural angle. Its fur was damp and clumped with mud. Its chest rose and fell too quickly, each breath shallow, panicked. The cub's eyes locked onto Michael the moment it saw him. In all his years in wildlife conservation, Michael had been taught one unbreakable rule: never interfere. Nature, no matter how cruel it appeared, followed its own balance. Intervention could do more harm than good. Rangers lost their jobs, and sometimes their lives, by forgetting that rule. He knew that somewhere nearby the cub's mother would be searching. Michael glanced around instinctively, his heart pounding. The open plain offered no cover, no easy escape. If the pride was close, he was already in danger just by standing there. Helping the cub would only make it worse. Every part of his training told him to step back, to turn around, to let nature take its course. But the cub cried again. This time it wasn't just fear in its voice. It was exhaustion, pain, the sound of a life running out of strength. Michael felt something shift inside him, something deeper than training, deeper than logic. He thought of the people he guided, the donors who funded conservation programs, the long discussions about ethical responsibility and the value of life. He had spent years speaking about compassion in carefully chosen words, often during quiet evenings by campfires under insured safari packages and luxury travel plans. Now compassion stood in front of him, raw and unprotected. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The cub flinched but didn't pull away. Its small body trembled violently as Michael examined the trapped leg. The stone had shifted during the night rain, locking the cub in place. Left there, it would either die of dehydration or draw predators long before help arrived. Michael removed his gloves with shaking hands. As he reached toward the rock, the cub did something unexpected. It lifted its head and met his gaze, not with aggression, but with something hauntingly familiar. Trust, or perhaps the absence of any other choice. At that moment, Michael Carter crossed a line he had respected his entire life. He didn't know it yet, but the stillness of that morning was about to shatter, and what followed would challenge everything science, experience, and survival instincts had taught him about the wild. Michael's fingers trembled as they wrapped around the flat iron bar he kept clipped under his belt for minor trail clearings. It wasn't meant for this, but then again, nothing about this moment was. The cub's breathing came in rapid bursts, like a motor struggling to keep running. Its eyes, wide and dull with fear, didn't leave his face. He jammed the bar carefully between the slabs of rock, bracing it against his knee for leverage. Every movement had to be slow, quiet. One snap from the stone could crush the cub's leg or Michael's hand. Sweat trickled down his spine as he pressed, listening for the groan of shifting weight. There. The rock budged just slightly, but enough. The cub whimpered and tried to pull free, but its paw was still wedged too deep. "Easy now," Michael whispered, not because the cub could understand him, but because he needed to believe someone could. "You've got to let me help." Another push. The bar slipped. His hand smashed into the stone, and pain shot up his wrist. He bit down hard and went again. The second time, the crevice widened just enough. The cub, sensing the change, gave a desperate twist and tumbled into the dirt at Michael's feet. It didn't run. Instead, it staggered forward, weak, trembling, and pressed its small body against his leg. Its claws clung to the canvas of his pants, tiny but sharp. Its head rested against his knee. Michael froze, not because of fear, but because something in the pit of his stomach told him this wasn't normal. This wasn't instinct. This was need, connection, pure and terrifying in its clarity. The cub wasn't letting go. He knelt again, unsure what to do. Lifting it might cause more pain, but leaving it here wasn't an option anymore. Even if the pride returned for it, the leg might be broken. The injury, if left untreated, could lead to infection. This part of the preserve didn't have vet access on call like more populated reserves. If he didn't act now, it might not survive another day. Michael gently slipped his arms around the cub's torso. It flinched at first but didn't fight. He felt its ribs beneath the matted fur, too prominent, too fragile. He could feel the heartbeat pounding against his forearm, frantic and fast. The cub weighed less than it should have. Probably hadn't eaten properly in days. That's when it happened. A breeze picked up, hot and dry, and swept across the plain. Michael felt the shift instantly. His instincts screamed louder than his thoughts. The wind had changed direction. And with it, his scent had traveled. He rose quickly, cub still in his arms and scanning the horizon. The brush behind him swayed gently in the breeze, silent and indifferent. Nothing stirred, but he knew better than to trust the quiet. Out here, scent was language. It was alarm. It was identity. And now the message riding that breeze was simple. There's a human, and he has one of ours. He turned slowly, shielding the cub with one arm. It had curled into him now, burying its head beneath his elbow. Every muscle in his body tightened. His breath slowed, not from calm, but preparation. If the pride was nearby, they would come now. He had maybe 2 minutes, 3 at most, before the alpha female, if she was within range, picked up the signal. Maybe less if the lion male was hunting or patrolling close by. He didn't have time to climb, to hide, or even to radio for help. His truck was nearly 70 yards away, parked beyond a low embankment and out of direct line of sight. The tourists would still be admiring distant giraffes or fiddling with camera settings. They'd never hear him call. And he couldn't run, not with a cub in his arms. That would be suicide. Michael backed toward a thicker clump of brush, moving slowly and scanning every line of horizon. His boots crunched against the dry soil, too loud. His breath sounded like wind in his own ears. He crouched low and pulled the cub closer, tucking it against his chest. The cub made a soft, rhythmic sound, something between a whimper and a purr, a sound that seemed to say, "Don't leave me." He didn't answer. He couldn't. But in that moment, he knew with complete certainty that the rules no longer applied. This wasn't about policy or protocol. This wasn't about ecotourism ethics or wildlife documentary standards. This was about one living thing helping another. It was compassion, plain human compassion, rising above everything else. And deep down, Michael hoped that if Lins could understand anything about humans, maybe it would be that. A dry rustle came from the brush line ahead. Michael turned his head sharply. His spine straightened, his legs tensed, ready to run, or fight, or do something, anything. Nothing visible yet. But something was there. He reached for the small emergency flare clipped to his belt, a leftover from his ranger days. Not a weapon, but something that might confuse, distract, delay. Not much, but all he had. And behind it all, a single thought repeated over and over, loud and insistent. I made this choice. Now I live with it. If he made it out of this, he'd write about it. Maybe tell the story in one of those online wildlife conservation blogs where people debate ethics and policy. He might even share it on video, maybe on a platform where outdoor enthusiasts or travel insurance clients scrolling past safari ads might see it. Not for views, not for fame, but to remind people that wilderness doesn't always follow rules, and sometimes neither should we. Because there are moments when logic bows to instinct, when the fear of getting sued or the risk of doing the wrong thing fades behind the simple truth. If you can help, you do, even when the consequences are still hidden in the grass. The air felt different now, charged like the moment before a summer storm. Michael crouched low, the cub still pressed to his chest, both of them hidden among the dry brush just beyond the cracked riverbed. His knuckles were white around the emergency flare, not because he planned to use it, but because holding something made him feel less powerless. The cub had stopped making noise. It didn't seem unconscious, just still. Too still, like it too sensed what was coming. And then he saw them. At first, they were nothing more than distortions in the heat waves, rippling outlines just beyond the tree line, but within seconds those outlines sharpened into unmistakable forms. 4 lionesses emerged from the tall grass, their bodies sleek and low, tails twitching. Behind them, further in the haze, a 5th figure lumbered into view. The lion, bigger than any male Michael had seen in years. Heavy, dark-maned, slow, but commanding. He walked like the land belonged to him, because it did. They didn't roar, they didn't growl, they didn't need to. Their eyes had already locked on to him. Michael knew exactly what they were seeing. A man, crouched, breathing too hard, holding something that was not his, something that belonged to them. This was no longer a question of territory. This was personal. He wanted to run. Every nerve screamed it, but he stayed still. Movement would mean threat. and threat would mean death. The lionesses stopped at the edge of the clearing, their golden eyes fixed on him like spotlights. They formed a wide arc, no words, no signals, yet perfectly synchronized. He'd seen this formation before, from a safe distance inside a vehicle. It was a classic flank and hold pattern used before the final kill in a hunt. But he wasn't prey. At least, not yet. The cub squirmed slightly in his arms, and one of the lionesses took a step forward. Michael's heart slammed into his ribs. He lowered his head, not in surrender, but in caution. If he looked directly into their eyes, it could be seen as a challenge. These weren't zoo animals. They didn't read expressions. They read intent, movement, scent, posture. He needed to make himself small, non-threatening, unimportant. And still, the lionesses didn't move any closer. For a long minute, nothing happened. The breeze carried the sharp, dry smell of heat and dust. Flies buzzed in the silence. The male lion remained back near the grass, his body half-shadowed by an acacia tree. He was watching, not guarding, not resting, watching, studying. Michael had dealt with dangerous creatures before, black rhinos, buffalo, even a near miss with a rogue elephant bull during mating season. But this was different. This wasn't rage or instinct. This was something else. The lionesses had stopped moving because they were waiting. For what? That's when the matriarch stepped forward. She wasn't the largest, but Michael could tell, by the way the others shifted around her, by the weight of her stare, that she was the one they followed. Her paws moved slowly across the dirt, each step deliberate. She came to within 20 feet, then 15. Her ears flicked once, her nose lifted. She was reading the air, and then her eyes dropped to the bundle in Michael's arms. Michael didn't move, didn't breathe. His grip on the cub loosened slightly, enough that the young lion's head lifted again. It made a tiny, gravelly chirp. Just once. The lioness stopped. Her posture didn't change. Her gaze didn't soften, but her tail stopped twitching, and her head tilted ever so slightly to the side, like someone seeing something they didn't expect, like recognition. Michael's thoughts raced. Could she recognize her own cub from this distance? Was it possible? Or maybe it wasn't just sight. Maybe it was scent, or the sound of that weak little chirp. Maybe that was all it took to change everything. And then, without warning, the lioness took another step forward, this time to within 10 feet. Michael's muscles clenched involuntarily. If she charged, he wouldn't have time to react. The flare wouldn't save him. The brush wouldn't hide him. The only thing between him and death was the thin, fragile weight of a wounded cub. The lioness sat down, just like that, quiet, unthreatening, but commanding. It was not submission. It was presence. A message. And for the first time, Michael felt something strange flicker inside him. Not safety, but possibility. Something was changing. Something about this moment didn't fit the usual scripts of predator and prey. There was no roaring, no stalking, no blood. There was only this strange, quiet negotiation happening in silence. Michael shifted slightly, letting the cub slide down toward the ground, careful not to startle either of them. The cub whined and leaned against his leg, but didn't run. The lioness's eyes followed every movement, and then Michael saw it. A second lioness, smaller and younger, stepped forward behind the matriarch. But she didn't move toward him. Instead, she lowered her head, nose to the earth, and sniffed where he had just stood. Her posture was inquisitive, alert, almost respectful. Michael didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just a man lost in the wild with a cub in his arms. He had been noticed. not as an enemy, not yet, but as something else. His thoughts flicked back for a brief moment to a blog article he'd read years ago about travel insurance for high-risk ecotours. It had listed predators, dehydration, even lightning strikes, but it had never accounted for this. No policy could. No clause could explain how a wild animal might see something human and not reject it. Michael stayed still, waiting. So did the pried. And in that thick, pulsing silence, he realized that something ancient had begun. Something no camera could ever fully capture. He was standing at the very edge of a choice, not his own, but theirs. Michael had never felt smaller. Kneeling on the cracked earth, surrounded by 5 full-grown lions, he was outnumbered, outmatched, and out of options. The cub at his side had gone quiet again, its small body trembling against his leg, eyes wide but not in pain, just confusion. It knew something was wrong, even if it couldn't understand what. Directly ahead, the matriarch remained seated, her amber eyes fixed on him. Her face was unreadable. No snarl, no blink, just unwavering attention. The others stayed in formation, spread just enough to remind him they could close the distance in seconds. The lion male hadn't moved, but his presence radiated like heat, dominant, watching, ready. Michael's muscles were tight as wire. He didn't dare breathe too deeply. He knew enough from his time as a ranger to recognize the tension in a pride when a decision was being made. This wasn't stalking. This was judgment. He wasn't being hunted. He was being measured. A single wrong movement could tip the scale. A shift in tone, a twitch of a limb, even a glance, held too long. Every lion here had the capacity to kill him in a heartbeat. And yet none had moved. He was no longer just a man in the wild. He was part of something unfolding, something delicate, ancient, and unseen. The cub whimpered softly again, then, to Michael's surprise, took a shaky step forward. Just one paw, placed lightly on the earth, then another. It hobbled, clearly favoring its injured leg, and moved toward the matriarch. Michael's hand instinctively lifted to stop it, but then froze in midair. Let it go. Whatever came next wasn't his to control. The cub reached the lioness and paused. Its nose lifted. The matriarch didn't move. For a moment they just stared at one another. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the cub brushed its head against her chest and collapsed at her feet. Michael exhaled, a sound between a gasp and a prayer. The matriarch finally blinked. Then she leaned down and touched her nose to the cub's spine, gently, once. Her tail flicked once, then stilled. It was an acknowledgment, but not yet acceptance. And Michael understood. This wasn't just about the cub. This was about him. She rose to her full height, massive and regal in the golden light. Then, in a motion so smooth it barely stirred the air, she took a step toward him. Michael's breath caught in his throat. She was only 8 feet away now. Every instinct he had screamed to back away, to break eye contact, to run. But he didn't move. He couldn't. If he moved, it would mean fear. If he ran, it would mean guilt. Instead, he did the one thing he never thought he'd do. He bowed his head. Not dramatically, just slightly. Enough. It wasn't a gesture from a textbook. It wasn't something he'd ever rehearsed. It came from instinct, from something primal inside that understood this was no longer a battle of strength, but one of presence. He wasn't submitting. He was showing respect. The lioness stopped again. They stood like that, man and predator, frozen in a mutual understanding neither could explain. And then came the moment Michael would never forget. The matriarch stepped closer. Not fast, not threatening. And then she did something that no guidebook, no wildlife insurance plan, no wilderness safety seminar had ever prepared him for. She leaned forward and touched her forehead to his. It was not a push, not a warning, not even a test. It was a gesture of recognition. Her breath was warm against his face, earthy and sharp. Her eyes were close enough that he could see the golden flecks around the pupils. For one suspended heartbeat, they looked at each other. Two creatures from different worlds locked in an impossible moment. And then, just as gently, she stepped back. Michael barely heard the flare drop from his hand. The other lionesses shifted slightly, not in agitation, but in alignment, as if a silent signal had passed through the pride. Whatever was being decided had now been decided. The lion male finally moved. With a low grunt, he padded forward, not quickly, but with that same grounded authority as the matriarch. He came. To stand beside her, glanced at the cub, then turned his head to Michael. It wasn't a glare. It was an assessment. Final. Complete. Then he sat. Right there, in the dirt, 10 feet from the man who had carried his cub. It wasn't submission. It was a verdict. You may stay. Michael didn't know whether to cry or collapse. His knees ached. His back screamed. His chest felt hollow with the shock of still being alive. The cub gave a short, high-pitched mew. It had curled into the space between the two adult lions, now resting at their feet. Michael blinked hard. The sun had shifted. The air had cooled slightly. And still no one moved to chase him off. No roar, no bluff charge, nothing. It was as if, in some silent ceremony that defied explanation, he had been accepted, not welcomed, not embraced, but spared. And in the world of lions, that was everything. He remained crouched for several minutes more, unsure what was expected, unsure whether the moment was truly over. But the pride made no move. Eventually he stood, slowly, carefully, and took one step back, then another. No one followed. He began to retreat, each step uncertain, each breath still caught in his throat. But he didn't turn his back. He wouldn't, not on them, not on the cub. When he was a safe distance away, he finally looked toward the horizon. Somewhere out there was his vehicle, somewhere behind him. A story had begun that he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. Michael had made it halfway back to the ridge before his knees gave out. He dropped slowly to the ground, chest heaving, hands trembling, coated in a film of sweat and dust. His pulse hadn't slowed since the matriarch's forehead met his. That moment still played on loop in his mind, surreal, sacred, and wholly unexplainable. He turned back just once to where the pride remained. They hadn't moved. The cub was nestled at the matriarch's side now, licking its paw with slow, exhausted motions. The lionesses were lying down, relaxed but alert, their bodies curled in quiet guardianship. And the lion male, he stood watch, his silhouette sharp against the golden light. Michael stared for a while longer. It felt wrong to leave, but he knew better than to overstay the welcome he had never deserved in the first place. He made his way back to the truck slowly, cautious with every step. When the vehicle finally came into view, parked just behind the knoll, a flood of conflicting emotions hit him: relief, disbelief, awe. The guests inside hadn't noticed a thing. They were too focused on a pair of giraffes in the distance. Janice, one of the older tourists, a retired teacher from Arizona, looked over and smiled. "There you are. We thought you'd gotten lost." Michael forced a small smile. "I found something I didn't expect." He didn't elaborate. Not yet. Inside, his sat phone buzzed with a missed call from the reserve's monitoring center. Probably routine. Possibly important. But right now, Michael couldn't process anything that wasn't the dust on his boots and the memory of that lion's breath on his skin. Back at camp that evening, after the guests had gone to their tents and the stars had begun to show, Michael sat alone outside the main cabin. His coffee had gone cold. A file lay open in his lap, a weathered field journal he kept more out of habit than obligation. He stared at the blank page for a long time before finally writing a single sentence. "I broke the rule." He tapped the pen against the paper, then underlined the sentence once. He'd always preached non-intervention, always told his trainees, "We're here to witness, not to change." It was the golden rule of every safari guide, every conservationist, every wilderness program designed to promote ethical wildlife tourism. He thought of the hundreds of wildlife insurance brochures, legal disclaimers, and conservation policies he'd reviewed in his early years. None of them had prepared him for a moment like today. There was no clause for exceptions made by instinct, no line that read, "In rare cases, if a lioness blesses you with grace, proceed at your own moral discretion." And yet, that was exactly what had happened. He reached for his GoPro, which had recorded nearly everything, mounted discreetly on his vest. He downloaded the footage to his laptop and let it play. There it was, the cub, the pride, the matriarch's approach, the forehead touch. He watched it in silence. He watched it again. It didn't make more sense the second time, or the third, but it was real. The next morning, he uploaded a short excerpt to a private cloud server, encrypted and backed up. Not for social media, not for news, for proof, for study, for those who needed to see it to believe it. A few days later, he sent the footage to Dr. Anna Lenz, a German behavioral biologist based in Windhoek, Namibia. They'd worked together on lion migration tracking years ago during Michael's ranger days. She was tough, rational, and unshakably skeptical. 2 days passed with no response. Then came a voicemail, her voice shaking. "Michael, I've watched it 4 times. I need to see that cub myself. I don't have the words yet." He understood. Words weren't enough for this, but science needed them anyway. By the end of the week, Anna arrived at the camp, followed by 2 research interns and a crate of equipment. She said little at first, choosing instead to observe from afar. Every dawn, she would scan the grassland with binoculars and high-resolution lenses, searching for signs of the pride. Michael gave her everything he remembered, the exact location, wind direction, the cub's behavior, the lioness's expression. He described the moment when he thought he would die and the moment when he realized he wouldn't. On the 4th morning, they found the pride again, far off near a line of acacia trees, under the soft haze of morning light. Anna gasped when she saw them. "That's her," she whispered. "That's the matriarch, the same one from your footage." They watched in silence as the pride moved through the grass. The cub, still favoring its legs slightly, trotted close to the matriarch, stronger now, playful even. And then, to everyone's disbelief, it turned, locked eyes with the truck, and let out a low, playful chirp. Anna looked at Michael. "That cub remembers you." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night, under a clear sky full of stars, Anna finally spoke freely. "What happened out there, Michael? It challenges everything we thought we knew. The recognition, the restraint, the non-aggression. These behaviors aren't just unusual, they're unprecedented. If we had life insurance for ethics, we'd be filing claims for emotional whiplash." He smiled at her choice of words. "And that cub," she continued, "may be the most important piece of data I've ever seen." She paused, looking out toward the distant dark. "I think they knew what you were doing. I think they understood." Michael nodded slowly. So do I. In the days that followed, Anna began working on a research proposal, her plan to launch a study into cross-species recognition patterns in wild lions, funded through a conservation grant partnered with wildlife education networks and eco-responsible travel sponsors. Michael agreed to help under one condition. No interference, he said, unless a life is on the line. Anna smiled, spoken like a man who broke his own rule. He chuckled, once, and I'd do it again. Because some moments in life aren't about data, they're about decision. And sometimes the wild answer's back. 2 weeks passed. Dry season settled deeper into the Kagalagatti, bleaching the grass to a brittle gold. The skies stayed cloudless. The winds picked up dust like memory, scattering it across the horizon. Michael hadn't returned to the clearing since that day, not out of fear, but out of respect. He knew better than to tempt the laws of nature twice. What had happened between him and the pried wasn't something you revisited like a tourist trap. It wasn't a miracle on demand. It was a fragile, one-time ceremony. An unspeakable understanding forged in the heat of instinct and silence. But then, on the 15th morning, the pried came to him. He was driving alone along a narrow stretch near the old Baobab Trail, a less-traveled route, mostly used by rangers checking cameras and solar-powered water stations funded by a sustainable wildlife tourism grant. The truck rolled slowly, tires crunching over scattered pebbles, and Michael was thinking about nothing in particular when he saw the first shape emerge through the grass. It was the matriarch. She stood still, halfway across the road, as if waiting. Michael braked, slowly. One by one, the rest followed. The lionesses, the towering male, and, at the rear, limping slightly but stronger than before, the cub. Michael's heart thudded once, hard. They weren't passing through. They were approaching. He turned off the engine. The lions came closer, but not in a rush. It was careful, deliberate. The matriarch walked toward the truck, her head low, not in aggression, but in acknowledgement. Her eyes met his, then flicked to the side, and that's when he noticed. They were forming a path. The pried split, half to the left, half to the right, forming two loose lines in the tall grass. Between them stretched a narrow corridor, wide enough for a man to walk. It wasn't random. It was an escort. Michael's breath caught in his chest. He stepped out of the truck slowly, every motion deliberate. His boots hit the dirt. The air was still. The lions remained where they were, watchful but calm. There was no growling, no tension, just waiting. The cub padded forward again, more confident this time. It sniffed at his boots, then rubbed its head briefly against his shin before turning and walking down the path between the lions. Michael followed. He didn't question it. He didn't analyze it. He just walked. Every few steps, one of the lions would shift slightly to maintain the corridor, like honor guards adjusting for a visiting dignitary. It was surreal, sacred, the kind of moment you don't talk over. You just live inside it and hope you remember it right. For nearly 100 yards they walked, Michael in the center, flanked by living emblems of power and grace. No camera could do it justice. No safari brochure, no wildlife documentary voiceover could capture the weight of what was happening. And then, just as suddenly, they stopped. They had reached a broad clearing where the grass dipped low and a circle of old trees shaded the soil. At the center was the cub, waiting. Michael paused. He looked at the matriarch. She stepped forward again, just once, and then did something that rooted him to the spot. She lowered her head and gently touched it against his leg. Just like before, but this time lower, softer. A farewell. The other lions followed, one by one, each offering a brief, subtle gesture. Some brushed against his arm, others gave short, huffing exhales near his side. Even the massive lion male approached. His golden eyes locked with Michael's for a long moment. Then he leaned in, not aggressively, but purposefully, and pressed his heavy forehead against Michael's shoulder. A sign of respect. Michael didn't move. He didn't want to break the spell. The cub was the last to come forward. It stood in front of him, tail flicking, then sat down in the dust. Its eyes looked up, curious, knowing, almost amused. It let out a small, drawn-out sound, somewhere between a chirp and a purr. Michael smiled. "I know," he whispered. "I don't believe it either." And then the cub did something extraordinary. It reached forward with one paw and touched Michael's boot, delicately, like a child reaching for a parent's hand. Then it turned and walked back to its pride. That was the end. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. They had delivered him here, walked with him, touched him, and returned their cub to his world and theirs. And now the door had quietly closed behind them. Michael stood in the clearing for a long time after the pride disappeared into the tall grass. He didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, he pulled out his phone, not for signal, but to record a voice memo, as he often did on long drives. This time, his voice shook a little as he spoke. Something happened today. Something I don't think anyone will ever believe, even with footage. A lion pride formed a path and walked me through it like I was one of their own. It wasn't about dominance. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else. Something like gratitude. Something like trust. He paused. I think I was given a chance to say goodbye. Back at the truck as he sat behind the wheel, his dashboard camera, which he'd left running, blinked to confirm it had captured everything. The footage would become one of the most talked-about clips on wildlife forums, documentary circles, and even a segment on a major home and life insurance provider's blog, discussing the unseen variables of nature exposure during eco-travel. But for Michael, the real memory would never be digital. It would always be the sound of soft paws in dry grass. And a cub, once broken, now whole again, walking away on its own. By the time word got out, it was already too big to contain. Michael hadn't posted anything himself. He never planned to. The footage from his dashboard camera, the vest-mounted GoPro, and Anna's long lens shots had all been cataloged for research, not for the world to gawk at. But one of Anna's interns, young, idealistic, and completely overwhelmed by what he'd witnessed, had quietly shared a low-resolution clip with a private conservationist forum. That's where it started. From there, it spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, the story was on wildlife blogs and safari travel newsletters. A well-known documentary channel contacted Anna's team, requesting exclusive rights. Someone edited a slow-motion cut of Michael's walk through the lion escort, complete with gentle piano music and a voiceover quoting Rudyard Kipling. And then came the headlines. Lions form honor guard for man who saved their cub. Tour guide gains unprecedented access to wild pride. The lion whisperer of Kagalagatti? Michael hated that one. He wasn't a whisperer. He wasn't magical. He was a man who'd made a decision he could neither explain nor regret. At the camp, things changed almost overnight. Visitors, mostly retirees, teachers, engineers, and small business owners from across the U.S., began requesting his group specifically. They didn't just want to see lions. They wanted to see those lions. The pride was still out there, still wild, still keeping to themselves. But they were no longer afraid of Michael's vehicle. On 3 separate mornings, they had come within viewing distance of his tours, calm, unhurried, like they recognized the scent and approved of his passengers. One afternoon, an older gentleman named Jack, a retired Air Force mechanic from Minnesota, leaned over in the truck and whispered, "I've seen a lot in my life, but if that lion looks over at you and nods, I might just believe there's something bigger going on here." Michael smiled. "I'm not sure I believe it myself." Jack chuckled. "Doesn't matter. I saw it anyway." The nickname came soon after, Brother of the Lions. It started with a guide from another camp, half joking on the radio. "You see Mike yet? He's walking with his cousins again." The Maasai trackers picked it up next. They called him Ndugu wa Simba, Brother of the Lions. A name rooted in both humor and honor. But what mattered more than the nickname was what came with it. Tour operators began shifting their marketing focus. Eco-travel agencies updated their insurance coverage descriptions, adding new emphasis on unpredictable cross-species interactions. Wildlife foundations reached out, proposing speaking tours and ambassador roles. And for the first time in his life, Michael Carter felt uncomfortably visible. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to do right by what had happened. So when Anna invited him to co-author the first academic article about the event, under the title Recognition and Restraint, a case study in cross-species social response among Panthera leo, he agreed, but with conditions. No dramatization, no theories about animal telepathy, no claims of supernatural connection. Just the facts, he told her, and the feeling, if they'll let us include it. The article went live 3 months later on a respected behavioral science journal. A week after that, National Geographic contacted them for a feature. And through it all, Michael kept working. He guided tours. He taught new rangers. He spoke at community meetings and local schools about conservation, respect, and the limits of what we think we know. But every few weeks, when he had a spare morning, he'd drive out alone. No guests, no cameras. Just him, his field bag, and a quiet thermos of coffee. He'd park near the ridge, set his boots on the warm earth, and wait. He never went looking for the pried. He just waited. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. But when they did, it was never for a show. They'd appear at a distance. Matriarch, cub, lionesses, male. No noise, no drama. Just presence. The kind that made you feel small in the best way possible. On one particular morning, as he sat beneath an acacia tree sipping lukewarm coffee, the cub, now nearly grown, appeared alone. No pride, no sound. It walked to within 20 feet, then sat. Michael nodded once. The young lion blinked slowly, and then, to his complete disbelief, it rose, walked forward, and lay down beside him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to share the same shade. They sat like that for nearly half an hour, man and lion, watching the wind shift across the plain. No words, no gestures, just peace. Michael never told anyone about that morning. He didn't record it, didn't take a picture. It didn't belong in a research paper or a tourism pamphlet. It belonged right there between the two of them. That night, as he wrote in his journal, he paused midway through a sentence. He looked out at the stars, clear and sharp above the dry dark, and he smiled, because he understood now. You don't get moments like that because you earn them. You get them because you were there, because you acted, and sometimes the wild remembers. It had been nearly 3 months since that morning under the acacia tree, the one where the young lion, nearly full grown, had chosen to share its shade with Michael. No roars, no warnings, just presence. That day had marked something for Michael, something he didn't fully understand, but he carried with quiet gratitude. Life had returned to its pace. The season was changing again. Cooler nights swept in, brushing through the dry canopies, stirring loose bark and whispers from the ground. The camp remained busy with travelers, mostly older couples, veterans, retired nurses, school teachers, and accountants seeking one more memory to carry home. They came hoping for elephants, rhinos, the elusive cheetah, and increasingly, they came asking about the lions. Michael never promised them anything. "This isn't a zoo," he'd say with a smile. "This is their land. We're the ones who need permission." Still they hoped, and once in a while, just often enough, the pride would appear at a distance. The tourists would gasp, cameras would rise, but Michael's eyes always found the cub first. Not a cub anymore. Strong, poised, still walking with a slight favor to the left rear leg, a small scar from the day it met a human who broke the rule. One afternoon, Michael received a message via radio from one of the rangers on patrol. "Mike, you're going to want to see this. South Trail, Low Bend, near the dry creek." He went alone. By the time he arrived, the sun was dipping low, casting long gold shadows through the grass. And there they were, the pride, resting in a broad circle near the rocks. The matriarch stood, but this time something was different. The young lion, Michael's lion, as some quietly called it, stood beside her, taller now, confident, and yet alert. It stepped forward, leaving the pride behind. Michael remained still just a few yards away. His hand brushed the side of the Land Rover, grounding himself. The lion approached, slowly, purposefully. There was no fear, no hesitation. And then, for the second time in his life, Michael experienced something that defied everything he thought he knew. The lion stopped just feet away. It looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then, in a single motion, it sat, not aggressive, not curious, present. Michael didn't speak. He didn't move. The lion leaned forward, gently touching its head, not to his hand, not to his chest, but to his forehead, just like the matriarch had done. A gesture. A farewell. It wasn't submission. It wasn't mimicry. It was acknowledgement. And then it stood again, turned, and walked back toward the pride. But before disappearing into the tall grass, it stopped once more, half-turned, and let out a short, soft sound, a vocalization somewhere between a call and a sigh. Michael knew. This wasn't another reunion. This was the end. The final chapter of their shared thread, tied together in the wild where no words had ever been spoken, and none needed to be. He stood there long after the lions had vanished, the light dimmed, the sky shifted to gray-blue. He climbed back into his vehicle and sat still, not turning the engine over. He reached for the small recorder he kept in the center console, pressed record. "This will probably be the last entry," he said softly. "Today, the lion came to me, alone. No pride. It touched my forehead, just once, same way his mother did that day in the riverbed, and then he left." A pause. "He's not a cub anymore. He doesn't need me, and that's how it's supposed to be." He ended the recording there. That evening, as he sat by the fire outside his cabin, Anna joined him. She didn't say anything at first, just poured coffee into 2 tin cups. They sat side by side, letting the night grow around them. Eventually, she asked, "So, that's it?" Michael nodded. "I think that was his goodbye." Anna looked into the flames. "Funny. For a species that doesn't speak our language, they sure know how to say something." He smiled. "They always knew more than we gave them credit for." Anna sipped her coffee, then glanced sideways. "Are you going to tell the story?" Michael shook his head. "I already did, just not with words." The camp grew quiet. Beyond the perimeter, night sounds stirred, jackals in the distance, an owl, the wind brushing across dry leaves. Michael sat back in his chair, the warmth of the fire touching his face. He didn't need a viral video. He didn't need a film deal or another article in a high-ranking insurance and travel publication titled, "When Nature Acknowledges You Back." He just needed the memory. And in a world where so much is rushed, broadcasted, and retold for likes and clicks, Michael had something better. He had a moment that belonged only to him and a lion. If this story moved you even just a little, leave a simple 1 in the comments so we know you were here. Or type 0 if it left you speechless, like it did for many of us. We read every comment, and your words truly matter. And if you'd like to keep walking with us through stories like this, real stories of courage, connection, and the wild, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are more unforgettable moments coming soon. Let's keep discovering them together.